of the general and the president. Currently, there are at least 5 more books by major historians that are going to come out to coincide with the 150th anniversary of the Civil War beginning next year. If revisionists prove as resilient and determined as Grant, then and only then might there be a chance for, I believe, for Grant to resume his place among the most important figures in American history. If justice as well as scholarship is served, Grant's presidential reputation will be higher. He may not be in the top greatest list, but he will be called an essential president. Do I think it will happen? I ask myself before the question and answer session. I want to say yes, but I acknowledge how difficult it is to change popular perception. I was asked, and I did, publish an op-ed in the LA Times in response to Southern Republicans' effort to remove Grant from the $50 bill and replace him with Ronald Reagan. I didn't say anything in my op-ed piece about Ronald Reagan. I think he deserves a lot, an airport named after him, for example, or a hospital at UCLA, which there is one. But I just wrote about, summed up pretty much the talk I just gave you, that we can't forget our history. And I'd love to give $50 bills to my sons who are graduate for their various presidents, but no, it's really a hard road to take to change somebody's historical reputation. Well, my conclusion is this: Grant's legacy to his own generation was deep and wide. My book argues that by the time of his death on July 23rd, 1885 at Mount McGregor, New York, Ulysses S. Grant was an icon in the historical memory of the war, shared by a whole generation of men and women. They believed that an appreciation of Grant could only come with the recognition that it was both the heroic general that saved the Union and the stalwart president who made sure that it stayed together. On the same day that 1.5 million Americans attended Grant's funeral in New York City, and countless others commemorated his life in cities and towns across this country, including the South, a newspaper headline provided what I consider the perfect epitaph for the accomplishments of the now mythic General and President Ulysses S. Grant. That headline was, "The Union is Monument." For them, U.S. Grant was already both an American hero and an American myth. Thank you very much.
What we're going to do now, if you'd like, she'll take some questions. If you have one, speak loudly. The microphone system isn't working if you haven't noticed that. We have hot hors d'oeuvres and drinks in the back for everybody. Opportunity to buy Jones' book is in the back. Dave Hubbard is manning that table. Please take the time to visit the different artists that are here and enjoy the next hour or so and share some time with Dr. Waugh, a full professor at UCLA.
When you say food and drinks, all the audience is going to leave. Are you sure? The ones who have
Questions first before the food is served.
Okay. You?
I believe in Grant's memoirs, the only thing that he faulted himself or regretted was the third attack at Pearl Harbor. What do you think was going on there at the time?
The question is, in regards to Grant's memoirs, he regrets, he expressed regret, and this is the only regret or apology that he made, was for the assault on Colton Harbor in early June, part of the Overland campaign. It was an ill-conceived debacle, 7,000 casualties in less than an hour. The question is, what do I think of it? What do I think of Grant's regret, or what do I think of Cold Harbor?
Well, what was going on with Napoli, or what was the strategy, or what might have caused particularly that third wave, in other battles that happened? What do you think was going on
I could just briefly, I mean, it's a question like all questions about the Civil War, which we could spend hours discussing. But in a nutshell, Grant had hoped throughout the Overland campaign to draw Robert E. Lee out behind fortifications, which Lee resorted to in the Overland campaign very smartly, and defeat his army. He thought by the time they got to Cold Harbor, to that part of Virginia, that Lee was weak, that his army was exhausted, and that he could be defeated, even with the huge assault plan. It speaks to the difficulty of the command structure of the Army of the Potomac. The orders weren't carried out, messages were lost, it was confusing. The assault on Cold Harbor was supposed to take place the day before. It wasn't done well, and so that was what was in his mind, was to defeat Lee's army. The huge casualties in Cold Harbor, but also from the very beginning in the wilderness in Spotsylvania, in other places along the way, were shocking to the Northern Republic. And after 6 weeks, it pretty much wrecked the Army of the Potomac. However, what happened? Grant was just outside of Richmond, so Lee did not stop him. Wait, Lee expected Grant to go back and lick his wounds in northern Virginia or outside of Washington, D.C., like every other Union commander. Instead, Grant not only stopped fighting, gave up fighting Lee against entrenched battles, and decided to cross the James and attack Petersburg. So when he crossed the James River, his campaign, his strategy was successful, even if the tactics were incredibly tragic and costly.
You said that the negative impression of Lee on Grant began around the era when the Southern historians were writing lost cause literature. I'm reading in your book, and it appears to me, you said, that even during this administration, he's considered a baby politician. The press is attacking him for nepotism, for scandals within his office, as being a weak administrator. So it seems to me that even while he's in office, the criticism had already begun.
The question is an excellent one. Didn't the criticism of Grant begin during his administration? Well, yes, it did, and that happens to every president. It happens to every president. The goal of a political party is to win the presidency in the House of Representatives and Senate, and the way you do that is to attack the other party in power. Some of the things that Grant did were worthy of attack, and he was wrong, and that's just what happened. So there were very, very difficult times in his first administration and obviously in his second administration. However, I'm talking about something a little bit different. I'm talking about the attempt by lost cause historians of that generation, people who participated in the war, beginning in 1866, to tear down Grant's reputation, tear down the Union cause. They also did it to Lincoln and to change history. They weren't able to do it with Lincoln, except in the South, but they were successful with Grant. But what he did in his presidency, Reconstruction, he's not really unpopular or hated in the South because of any whiskey rig scandal. He was unpopular because of his Reconstruction policy. He was unpopular because he sent United States troops to interfere in Southern elections when the Ku Klux Klan and other white terrorist organizations attacked black voters. And that was just, that's why they hated him. That's why Reconstruction in so many history books up until recent times is portrayed as a dark and evil time. And part of the reason is that African Americans part of the problem of thinking and teaching and writing about Reconstruction is that the war is so exciting, it's tragic, it's everything. It's the greatest story ever told with respect to the Bible. It's so much fun to teach it. do with the Civil War. I mean, it's actually very exciting. The goals of the war for the North were to preserve the Union, and after 1863, emancipation. So there was a revolution in this war that carried over into Reconstruction. So how was the North going to bring a very embittered white population back into the family table, but also set a place for their former property, slaves? So it was very, very difficult. In 1874, the Democrats carried both the House of Representatives and they captured the Senate. Reconstruction was actually over in 1874. Does that answer your question?
What exactly happened to Grant's children?
Oh, the question is, what happened to Grant's children? He had 4 children. The oldest, Ulysses Fred Grant, named after Julia's brother, had a fairly distinguished career in the Army, in the military, and he also dabbled in business. And let's see, there was Ulysses S. Grant Jr. and Jesse Jr., 2 other boys. They were in business. Jesse was in business with Ferdinand Ward, and in fact it was that company that caused Grant to go bankrupt in the early 1880s. But both boys, both young men, came with their families, came and lived in San Diego, California, and Jesse Grant established the U.S. Grant Hotel, which is a beautiful hotel in San Diego if you ever go there. And it's right downtown, and that's what he did. His grandson, Jesse Grant's son this is much more, there were many grandchildren. One of the sons who was in San Diego became a professor of geography, went to Stanford and got his PhD, I believe, and came to UCLA and taught for years in our geography department. And so anyway, I don't know. And then there was a daughter, and the daughter married a European, an Englishman. She divorced him. But they all had children, and they're still around today, in fact, in New York. A lot of them. Wait, there was someone else. Okay, you.
How do you feel Grant was treated in Ken Burns' documentary on the Civil War?
I think he was treated fairly well, don't you?
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
wondering.
I enjoyed that documentary a lot. I think it's a beginning rather than an end if you're interested in the Civil War. But it was very powerful, very moving, and it certainly had as its guiding theme emancipation. And I think that that Grant's role, I would say it didn't do as well on military campaigns as I would have liked, and it didn't have very much attention paid to the Western theater. But we all have complaints about things that.
I have a relatively local question.
Oh, a local question.
2 weeks ago, I was in Boonville, New York.
Boonville, New York.
About 2 hours northwest.
Okay.
There's the guest register of the hotel built assigned by Sheridan, Grant, Forest River, December 10th, 1870.
John Griswold, Detroit.
And the question is, why would they do
Yeah,
that?
exactly.
You wouldn't want to be there December 10th with the
1870?
Right, it was president. Yeah, address.
Okay, the question is Grant and Sheridan, is that, and Horace Greeley? That's assigned into a hotel in
Boonville,
Boonville, New York.
Yes, Albert House.
That's fascinating. If I had my volumes of my papers of U.S. Grant with me, I could go to the year 1870 and find out exactly what he was doing on that day.
Does anybody else know this is all?
I don't know.
We're checking
If you remember, Horace Greeley ran against U.S. Grant in 1872. And with all due respect for your favorite New York newspaper editor, he lost badly. And he was,
Can I just follow up with one statement on that, in case anybody's looking? We did ask in the hotel if anybody knew, because they don't put other people around there, we think they researched it. And the nearest anybody came was they were headed up towards Watertown, where there was a military installation, or something. In December.
I don't know. It could be a fake signature. Who's next? Way in the back. Oh, thank you for standing up.
I have a question and a comment. I'll do the comment first. When I was in high school back in the early 70s, I took a Civil War class. And thinking back on it, the two names that were mentioned over and over again were Lincoln and Lee. And I do not, in all honesty, recall Grant ever being mentioned.
Do you think I would lie to you? Another bit of research. Yeah.
But my question is this. I've read in any number of biographies that Grant was a fellow migraine sufferer. And knowing what it's like after migraine is over, and the fact that I've been told I will come over, though I've never been drunk in my life, I
You
think
say.
I'm wondering if many people mistook Grant's after migraine condition for after Bender.
Okay, here's the question for those of you who didn't hear. She brought up the fact that Grant suffered from migraine headaches, and she wondered if some of the accounts of him supposedly being drunk or assumed to be drunk were because of that. And I think the historians who've written about it say yes. But there are also, so yes, and he, of course, had a famous migraine on the day that Lee sent him the note saying, "I surrender," April 9th. And then he wrote in his memoirs, the headache disappeared. So that's what it takes to get rid of a migraine, which is.
Professor Waugh, the Indian Wars sort of reached a crescendo during Grant's presidency. What was the view of the American Indian by U.S. Grant?
The question is, the Indian Wars reached a crescendo during U.S. Grant's presidency. They certainly did. This was the time that the plains and the prairies were fought over, and Southwest and in the Midwest and in the northern plains. So what did the Indians think of Grant? Well, they didn't like him for the most part, although many delegations came to the White House. Grant, in his 1869 inaugural address, spoke very movingly about the plight of the Indians. They didn't fare well under Lincoln or any other president that had been in office since Washington. So he recognized this, and he wanted to reform the Indian Bureau. He wanted to infuse Indian policy with a humanitarian ethos, and he appointed a number of people to do this. His first commissioner of Indian Affairs was the very first Indian, Native American, to be appointed to a major government office. That was Eli Parker, his secretary, Seneca secretary, who was from New York, obviously. And it's so he had what's called Grant's peace policy toward the Indians. They appreciated that, but underlying his peace policy was I can't say it any differently, the belief that the Indians were not going to be able to control millions of acres of land that was already being settled. So that had to be sorted out in treaties, and there were a series of treaties. Were the Indians treated better? To some extent, yes. I mean, his goal was to make them into Americans. Today, we look at this and we're appalled because we respect Indian culture and Native American tradition. But there wasn't that respect back then. They were Victorian Americans. They thought the best thing you could be was to be like white Protestant Americans. So he tried to infuse it with humanitarian. He tried to stop the corruption. He didn't succeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, our hot hors d'oeuvres have just become lukewarm hors d'oeuvres. So she is going to be here to sign books. We have her book for sale at a substantial discount. Ladies will be passing around the hors d'oeuvres and drinks. Please take your time. General and the President